What's up guys, welcome back to Elwood Games. Thomas here, and this week we're talking all about the 11th edition reveal show because obviously that's the hot goss right now and I'm excited to talk about it. But first, I just wanted to say apologies for last week, missing a video. I really don't like doing that and I hope not to have to do it in the future. Life just kind of got in the way, but we are full steam ahead with 11th edition rumors and now some affirmation. So let's talk about kind of the big hitters on what was revealed during the reveal show and kind of my thoughts on certain things and what I think some of the teasers might be leading to, and do a little bit of speculation and that sort of thing. So first, we know that the launch box is going to be Blood Angels versus Orcs. Of course, they later stated in another article that released basically that like they can be painted any way. So it sounds like they're not going to have specific, they're probably not even going to have upgrade sprue for Blood Angels. It's just going to be regular Space Marines with red paint on them. And we're going to see a few kits updated. They teased an Intercessor as well as an Orc Boy. But one thing I wasn't expecting is the amount of teasers they're talking about with 11th edition. The only thing I was hoping for is the first one, which is huge. So firstly, codexes are staying in, which we were all kind of speculating on. We all kind of thought that was what was going to happen. But I am on record saying to hold off buying codexes until this was ironed out. And I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be this announcement where they did it. I figured it might be a little bit closer. But I think they may, from a marketing standpoint, have realized that codex sales are down because everyone knew the new edition was coming. So they're saying that the codexes are good to go for 11th edition. In connection with that, we're looking at detachments, and they're saying that all your codexes attachments are going to be good for 11th edition, but that there's a ton of new ones coming in. So they say 70 detachments, so that if it's equally dispersed, that's like 5-ish per faction if they equally disperse them. But we know that, you know, Space Marines and Orcs, they're probably going to get their own, and, you know, potentially the individual Space Marine factions might get their own. So I think outside of those, you might be getting 2 or 3. And if there's some detachment or some factions that aren't going to get a lot of love, they may get, you know, 0 or 1 initially. We might see that bump up to 3 or 4 for kind of the other factions. So that's really exciting. So we have not only that, if you're thinking about getting into a new army, you can go ahead and buy the codex without any issue. It's going to be fine going into it, but also at the launch of 11th edition, as well with the core rules, we're going to be getting new detachments for what appears to be everybody, which is fantastic. I love getting new ways to play and new kind of things to build around, but also, you know, my older factions, like I've built pretty heavily into Retaliation Cadre for Tau. So knowing that that's going to at least stay intact until their codex, but ultimately probably through the codex, is very encouraging. So it makes me, you know, not feel as hesitant to continue building toward more Retaliation Cadre style gameplay. So I'm excited for that. Speaking of detachments, an interesting kind of development is the update to missions. So I'm kind of wondering what this is going to look like, but it's saying that they're actually going to have missions tied to your detachments. So whether that's the primary mission of the thing that's going to basically determine how you primarily score points, or if it's going to be more of a secondary mission sort of deal where you still have your objectives, which I do mention. So this is more likely, I would say, that your secondary missions are going to be based on your detachment, which makes them a lot more like agendas in Crusade, and potentially more like the agendas that were in the Armageddon Crusade book, where you kind of roll a die to determine which one every round. And I think that could be an interesting way to sort of tie in a little bit of the randomness of the mission deck that we have currently, and we had basically all of 10th, and still having it be more flavored toward your specific detachment. Because it sounds like their goal, kind of unfortunately, is not to divide competitive and narrative play. It's to basically have every game feel narrative, which it'll be interesting to see how that turns out on the competitive side of things. So, you know, 11th edition is likely going to have a very different looking tournament organizer and that sort of deal. So that's still yet to be seen. I really like this change. All the changes up to now I've obviously liked. I've been in favor of all of that. I'm always good for new detachments. And even with the detachments, there's even talk of mixed detachments. So I'm kind of wondering if that's going to be like the regiments mechanic in Age of Sigmar, where you have specified battalions that have special army rules within them that you can run as part of your overall army, so that they get a specific bonus based on them, but you also have the other kind of regiments have their own thing, or you can have it be everyone gets the same buff and that sort of thing. I think that would be really cool for Tyranids, because I could have my invasion fleet have the invasion fleet sort of idea. I could have the Vanguard, the Vanguard invaders have their thing. Subterranean, like if they mix and match it in a way, I think it could be really, really cool. So I'm really excited for that and excited to see how it fleshes out. So I'm hoping that that comes pretty soon in sort of what they're going to be teasing out for us in the next few weeks. Getting back to the missions though, I'm really excited for this change. Ultimately, I have one army that's really good at holding objectives with the Tyranids. I'm able to get up to an objective, stick it for a little while, and usually hold out till turn 3, maybe even 4, with a Norn on an objective and being able to stand my ground. But they're also really good at secondary objectives as well. Whereas Tau, I feel really struggle at holding objectives, but are fantastic at secondaries. I can almost always score pretty close to maximum on secondaries every turn because I have such good maneuverability, such good threat elimination, and that sort of thing. So I'm excited to see how they pivot everything to go into sort of that realm where you're going to have detachments that are specifically better at doing certain things like holding objectives or eliminating opponents or holding different areas of the board and that sort of thing. So it'll be really cool to see what they flesh out in the missions for the specific missions for the detachments. So this is a change I'm really stoked for. Speaking of objectives, circles are gone, which is wild. That's definitely not something I was expecting, but I know that it's been a little bit of a pain point for a lot of people in the community, and just kind of like, oh, why do we have to have these big circles on the field, that sort of thing. So now they're going to move to objectives having terrain footprints. So these are going to represent ruins, relics, just some of the things that they called out in the preview and that sort of thing. I think this is really cool. It makes a lot more sense. It is going to already add a little bit of flavor to sort of the primary objectives where you're trying to hold these places. They could be fortifications and whatnot and that sort of thing. It also gives you a little bit more of a potentially feeding into this idea of like having objectives actually do something for your army instead of just scoring you points, which I think could be an interesting sort of direction to go with the game design. Obviously, that's yet to be seen, but still definitely a cool way. I really like this idea. And I like that they say footprint instead of specific terrain. Makes me think that they're going to have some kind of, honestly, it's probably going to be similar to tournament layouts where it's like a rectangular shape or that sort of thing. And you must be probably within it, I would imagine. That would make sense based on how objective control works currently. I don't think they're going to move that too much just because of how much objective control kind of matters in 10th edition, and if all the codexes and data sheets are mostly transporting over. Notably, there were some mentions that data sheets are changing slightly. We don't know exactly what yet. It sounds like a lot of stuff is carrying over, so that's to be seen. But with objectives being terrain footprints, it does mean that objectives are going to naturally grant the benefit of cover, which, in my next point, terrain is getting updated, and it's saying that it's saying that units are going to be easier to hide, and that instead of it giving additional save, it's actually going to make it harder to hit, which I'm a little mixed on. I think that it makes more thematic sense that something that is within cover is harder to hit, but I think from 10th's sort of overkilliness, I think that it kind of affects that. But also, if you think about it too, like a torrent weapon, right? Most flamers already ignore cover anyway, and you don't have to roll to hit. So flamers are still going to be just as good into terrain. So I think it's a pretty net neutral change, since those were the only guns that always had ignores cover tacked onto them. So it'll be kind of interesting to see that kind of change. I think for the most part, what'll be interesting is, I mean, to think about it in one of my armies specifically, is if the ignores cover thing still works, then when I marker light something with Tau and I ignore cover, I ignore that modifier to hit. So I'm going to be hitting full swing and AP full swing into everything, which may be a little bit of a problem, but we'll wait and see kind of what the official rulings end up being worded like and see how that goes. The next update that they mentioned, which I was really surprised that like this is as in-depth as they went, is that the fight phase is going to be slightly different. So it sounds like there's some potential changes to fights first. I wouldn't be surprised if we see initiative become a thing. So in Horus Heresy, there's initiative rolls and it determines who fights first in combat. But also in Horus Heresy, you actually fight at the same time the first round. So you don't fall before you get to swing back. I think that could actually be a really good change. I'm not going to lie. I think that having it be a clash kind of deal where everyone gets to fight and then the first casualties are removed, I honestly wouldn't hate that, because I think part of the hard part of the fight phase when you're into a very melee heavy army is just that. Like a melee heavy army gets in, they fight into you, and they just brutalize a squad before you can even have any hope to fight back. So we'll kind of wait and see what they say, but it does say that there's going to be some balancing, and they specifically call in one of their articles about the sort of overpowered nature of the fights first keyword. So it'll be interesting to see what we see happen, whether it's initiative or whether there's just a slight change to how the fight phase happens. I really can't wait to see what it is, but my hope would be either initiative be a thing, so we have a little bit more of a tiered kind of approach of when things fight, or we see the ability to kind of everything fights all at one time, so that way there's still losses, but everyone's fighting at full strength, so to speak. Another thing that was released in the article following the reveal show is that charge rolls will actually be changed. So you'll actually declare a charge, roll the die, and then you get to choose what unit or units you charge, which is a big change, because it basically means like, okay, I can, I really want a long bomb, but there's also a unit within, in an opposing direction that, I'd like to be able to go into if I don't do that. So now you can roll, oh, I only got a 6. I can go into this squad that's like suboptimal, but at least I'm not burning a command point to re-roll or just stuck out in the open, which is, I think, a pretty tremendous boon to melee armies. Like, I think that's really strong and really good. I'm almost wondering if there's going to be some limitations on re-rolling it and what that looks like. But who knows? All I know is that right now, that's a really interesting idea that you get to say this unit is charging, roll the die, and then move to the unit or units that you want to charge. Another thing that was called out in the article following the reveal show is the fights phase, the consolidate and pile in is changing the order somewhere within the fight phase. So I'm kind of interested to see what that means and what that's going to look like. Because specifically, pile in allows you to move up to 3 inches into the unit or units that you are currently engaged with. So typically this is done after you charge in and you pile in to be able to get more people into combat. And then consolidate is after you're finished fighting. If you're no longer within engagement range of an enemy unit, you move into engagement range of another enemy unit or onto an objective marker if it's closer than the closest enemy unit, and that sort of thing. Ultimately, I don't think that's as impactful as the talks about how fights first and the charge phase are going to be changed, but it's still something that is pretty relevant, and they have mentioned it, so it is going to be definitely different than what it is currently. And then another thing that came out of sort of an article to follow is talking about the app updates, which I did want to talk about because it's pretty relevant here. So notably, they did mention that the app will support game scoring. So you're actually going to be able to track your games within the app, which likely means that the app itself may include, you know, the primary mission rules, potentially the deployments, and maybe even the secondary missions, which could be really cool. I think that could be an interesting idea, especially if you already do like Warhammer Plus. If that just gives you access to those things, would be great. Really great, GW, if you just let us have access to that instead of buying the mission deck and that sort of thing. Be really nice. Please. At the very least, it'll be a score tracker. It could literally be as minimal as just having a dedicated screen that lets you tick up your primary and secondary points, if that's how points are going to be. Probably will be. That was a call out, and I think that's pretty relevant, especially since I know a lot of the guys at my shop, we use the Warhammer app for our data sheets and everything. We're keeping track of all of our stuff within the app, checking our data sheets and all that. Having that and the scoring within the same app, hopefully UI wise, it's convenient and easy and not a lot of like swishing around between pages and that sort of thing. I will say the more surprising note that came from it is that it's saying that we're going to be able to see our opponent's data sheets within the app, which is something that they've never done before. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, to what extent are we seeing them? And I don't know if it's going to be like limited to like an organized play where, you know, when you're paired up with the Chaos Knights player, you're able to see like all the data sheets for Chaos Knights, or if it's you're paired up with this very specific Chaos Knights player, you're able to see their loadout, their war gear, and that sort of thing. I think based on some of the sort of issues we had over the past edition, but a lot in this past year of, you know, oops, an accidental Hellbrute, or oops, accidental squad of something, those sorts of situations that if I don't play that army, I don't know how many points they necessarily are. If you brought an extra Hellbrute, I have no way to validate that that's good without doing a pretty extensive amount of research and determining, okay, you have this unit, this unit, this unit, this unit, and like counting it up, tallying it up, and that sort of thing. I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm fascinated to see how they're going to kind of put all that together and what it's going to be. Like, are we always going to be able to see all the data sheets? Like, is everything effectively going to be indexed in some way that we can actually just see the war gear options for every army? I think that'd be cool. I wouldn't be against that, honestly. I'm a proponent of giving access via the app. I mean, look, I don't really like paying for it. Obviously, there's plenty of game systems out there that offer basically all their rules for free, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I would love for GW to go that route. I don't think they are, though. They're a big company. They're a capitalist kind of company. So it's likely that in some way or form, we're going to be paying for the extra rules somewhere. And I think that it might be just something that is included with Warhammer Plus. Because I don't think they phrased it in a way that it's like you will be able to see your opponent's stuff through the app. So it's saying that it's through the app, but you know, they haven't necessarily tied that it's a cost to it. But also we know that currently the app is more favored if you are a Warhammer Plus subscriber. You can have unlimited number of army lists within it. You're limited to just one in the free version of the app, which is like, might as well just use a different app if I'm being completely honest. But you know, I pay for Warhammer Plus. I think it's a fine deal for just because I have multiple armies. I can keep all my lists in there. I can have multiple lists for each of my armies based on what I want to play that day. And for me, it works out, you know, it's like $60 a year. That's like $5 a month. I mean, it's what I pay less. I pay more on, you know, subscriptions and that sort of thing. So, you know, I'm in a position that I can afford it. So it's not really a big deal to me. But obviously you guys may not be. And I totally feel for that. And hopefully the other third parties that currently provide rules for free are able to do so and continue to do so into 11th edition. And so you can still use things like New Recruit or Wahapedia and the like to be able to keep on using them for free. Because I definitely want that to still be an option. I just prefer to use what I feel is a more streamlined version, which is the Warhammer app itself. 10th edition is coming to a close. we're going to have one final sort of campaign book set with Armageddon again, oddly. But we're going to see sort of the closing in to 10th edition and pushes us right into the start of 11th, where we're still going to be technically on Armageddon with Blood Angels versus Orcs. And it's just been a great edition. Obviously this is my first edition of 40k, and I've met a lot of new friends and been able to play a lot of awesome games in this edition. So I'm hoping that a lot of the spirit behind it remains, but ultimately I think all the changes that I'm seeing based on the article and the preview season, it sounds like these are all good changes and mostly all going to be net neutral or net positive. I don't see any that could be net negative currently anyway. Obviously that can change, and obviously I'll probably make a video about it if they release something that I feel is going to be negative, because that's just what we're going to do, right? So let me know down below what your favorite parts of the preview were and what things you're most excited for 11th edition, just down in the comments below. But I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.